Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is Ukraine War News Update Part 2 for the 1st of August 2023. Let's get straight to the first segment, which is the Frontline update. And we're going to go up to the northeast, so Kupiansk to Svatova to Crimea. Where this is from Radu Hosu, who's a Romanian analyst, says on the eastern front, Kupiansk to Crimea, the overall situation looks very bad for the Russians. That what was announced as a force of 100,000 Russians, 900 tanks and 500 other armoured vehicles. Remember, there's a lot of talk about, I think there are 100,000 troops up there. Whether there's 900 tanks, I severely doubt it, and 500 other armoured vehicles. That seems stretching it a little bit. It seems that not only have they reached their peak, the maximum point of offensive capability, but for 2 days they've been losing ground on the whole front. And in the north, he says, that's the Liman Pershi area, the Russians have not advanced for a week. The reason, because they have nowhere else to go and certainly no way to get past the Sversk-Donetsk River, because they have the geophysical obstacle, the Oskil River, and behind it, high ground from which the AFU is constantly shelling them. In the Svatova-Borova area, so this is this area, Karmazyanivka, you remember about 5-6 days ago, the Russians made some great advances for a couple of days, and then ever since then they've been hemmed in and pushed back. And indeed, Suryat Maps here, the pro-Russian mapper, admitting that the Ukrainian army launched a counterattack and retook full control over Novohayurivka, and that the troops have reached the outskirts of Nadir, while other sources said that Nadir has been liberated again by the Ukrainians. Suryat Maps is somewhat behind. In fact, someone called them out or a number of people, I think, on Twitter, and they had a bit of a response to what they saw as trolls calling him out for incorrect mapping or not reacting quickly enough. So that was quite interesting. I might share that with you later. He says clashes with the Russian army are currently taking place in Nadir. I think they probably moved past there. But to go back to Hosu, he says in that Svatova Borova area, in the last 3 days, the Ukrainians have liberated as much as the Russians illegally conquered in 2 weeks, being about 2 kilometers from the front line before they loudly announced Russian counteroffensive. A few kilometers to the north in the Andriivka, Luhansk Oblast, Zirelny area, and in the Novoselivska, Luhansk Oblast areas, the contested areas is right in favor of the Ukrainians, who have pushed back the Russians by about 4 to 5 kilometers in the last week. I don't know if that's definitely true around Novoselivska. I've not heard about that. That's Kuzmivka. If you guys know that, then that's great. If you don't know what I'm talking about, check out my Frontline update, my proper, full, robust video that comes out next. And then south towards Crimea, heavy battles continuing in the forests around there. And then it's down to Bakhmut, really, where Andrew Perpetua says he's looked at shelling reports, and it looks like the Ukrainians have more control to the north of Klishchivka, I think it is. Yeah, position to the north of Klishchivka. No reports says, based on Ukrainian soldiers' reports, the main task now is destroying as much mortar artillery in a close vicinity of Andriivka and Klishchivka. Both are left by the Russians, but not fully secured. So he's saying that those two settlements are not fully under control of the Ukrainians, but the Russians have left there. Radu Hosu says of Bakhmut that actually it's slightly different. The 100% abandoned is Andriivka, but Klishchivka 30% controlled by the Russians still. But there are different views on Klishchivka. It's all about getting to the T0513, a road to the east. But he talks about, although fighting going on in the north, in the center, he says that the western part of the city is completely under artillery control of the Ukrainians, and that the special forces are doing daily harassing attacks into the town. So that's interesting. And then as we come to the south, actually, Avdiivka, to the south of Avdiivka, there's a place called Nevelsky, which is a small agricultural settlement, small rural settlement that is actually quite important for not allowing the Russians to encircle Pervomaisky to the south, which then allows Avdiivka as a whole not to be encircled. So it's a really important little place, considering how kind of small it is. But there are a lot of trenches built around there. Anyway, the Ukrainians are making some gains there, increasing the buffer zone around there. We have seen that recently, and I thought that is what I had updated maybe 4 days ago, 5 days ago. So I don't know if this is just a little bit slow. We'll check that out in the Frontline update later. And then we come down to the south of Velika Novosilka, this area to the south of Velika Novosilka, down the river, on the way to Staromayorsky, and so on and so forth. No reports here says that Russian sources reconfirm Staromayorsky is in Ukrainian hands. So there was some argument, again, Surrey maps. Preliminary info coming from Novodonetsk and Novomayorsk. So they are to the west, the two settlements to the west of Uruzhany and Staromayorsk, which are there on that river delta, well, not river delta, the meandering river as it comes down north to south there. These western places are in the grey zone. Preliminary information coming from there. I mean, there are claims that they have been liberated, but he's put them firmly in the grey zone. And the Ukrainians are pushing southwards between Priyutne and Staromayorsk and flanks of Uruzhany. So they're pushing around Uruzhany, and they are pushing down. There was this big, other mappers have a big salient or bridgehead up here where the Russians still control. Actually, he's moved the Russian defensive line to be pretty much horizontal right across this whole sector. So that is quite significant. There could be some moves in that way. Talking about Romanov, who is a Russian source. Russian source Romanov states that the Ukrainians control Staromayorsk and that the situation in Uruzhany is deteriorating, which he said yesterday. Romanov also claims it's a matter of time before Uruzhany is left. So that was what was claimed yesterday. Progress southwest of Staromayorsk towards Zabitne. So we might have, I've talked about the next town being targeted yesterday by things like drones and artillery. But it could be that the Ukrainians are on the way there. You can see in this map, there is that salient between Priyutne and Staromayorsk so there it is, that Null Reports doesn't have there. It's kind of flatter, so there are different mappers have different ideas of what's going on. But here War Frontline says about 25 to 30% of Uruzhany has been liberated, so they are pushing down south through Uruzhany. You can see there the front line sort of goes through the middle of the town there. And then moving to the west to Robotny, which is south of Orikhiv and around the Malatok-Machka area. Ukraine has regained some lost positions northeast of Robotna, and they, as they get shelled by unguided rockets fired by Russian helicopters. 2.2 square kilometers has been added to the liberated status. I think this is area that they took and then was taken back. There was a big kind of failed attack where they lost an awful lot of equipment, and there's big messes with regard to, I think, communications and possibly just decision making as a whole. They lost a lot of troops and equipment there. Since then, it's been pretty quiet in terms of information coming out, and I've just been not quite sure whether the Ukrainians have definitely been pushed back or not from that area. But here is a claim that they're retaking some of that ground that they might have taken and then subsequently lost. If we go further to the west, so that's where we're talking about there, that's Robotna there. No Reports actually says in this kind of area no map changes, but he goes to the west around Kamyanska, the 15th Operational Brigade, Karadag, has started offensive actions towards Novopokrovka. Actually, no, that's here near Robotna. Since a few days, we have seen some footage claiming advances which couldn't be tracked back to a particular area. So, you can see where the arrows are attacking towards Verbove, attacking towards Novopokrovka, attacking towards Robotna, as well as Kamyanska as well. And there's quite a bit of talk about Kamyanska too. This is quite a different looking map, as you can see from this one. I think it's more generous to the Ukrainians in No Reports map there. But as ever, you get differing opinions of what's going on. So recently, Andrew Perpetua said around the Kamyanska area, the Ukrainians have been consolidating ground, taking ground, but it's not necessarily changed the defensive lines of the Russians. It's just eating into the grey zone. So they're just slowly consolidating their area that they've kind of advanced to. Ukraine appears to advance in this area south of Kamyanska, where Ukraine has been progressing for over a week, and north of Zerobianki. In satellite imagery yesterday, we see brand new fires in that area. So we'll talk about that again in the Frontline update proper. And then this is from Rebar, who says that basically situation around the Antonivsky Bridge is not that favourable for the Russians. We haven't heard much about the Antonivsky Bridge for some time, but here the pro-Russian source saying, despite the systematic fire strike, the enemy reaches the southernmost islands, and artillery from Sadova on the right bank delivers harassing blows to the northern outskirts of Oleshki. The problem, the presence of the enemy on the left bank of the Dnieper has not gone away. Attacks do not seem to pose a serious threat, but due to their systematic nature, they are dangerous for the future. Perhaps the countermeasures being taken are not effective enough, and now is the time to change something. So some frustration there with the Ukrainians still present and still causing issues, although there may not be many advances in that sector. And the Ukrainians are also still trying to hammer across the kind of river estuary, if you like, from the Bug River and Dnieper as they come in, and trying to hit the Kinburn Peninsula. Ukrainian artillery is hit and destroyed an entrenched observation and firing post of the Russian forces north of Pokrovka on the Spit on the peninsula there. So lots of activity up and down a front line. As I say, we'll go into more detail later. Right, military aid. UK is training 2,000 Ukrainian special forces for military operations in Crimea, reports the Sunday Express. So we have the UK has quite a good reputation in terms of special forces, like the SAS, the SBS, Special Air Service, Special Boat Service, have a rich history and have been seen as a fairly effective number of organizations, and I think we're probably in quite a good position to train, and it looks like we're training a number of the Ukrainian special forces. Here's another source, Ukrainian Front, saying Great Britain is preparing Ukrainian special forces to liberate Crimea by Christmas, writes the Express. I think that might be a bit sensationalist, but the operations will include air, land and sea strikes and will be supported by a stockpile of long-range missiles supplied by Great Britain, the US and Germany. I don't know if that's reference to Taurus missiles and whether that means that they are going to be going. Ukraine signs a deal with Turkish drone maker Baykar, so they make the Bayraktar, the TB2, to build a repair centre. The deal advances a framework agreement on high-tech cooperation. In June 2023, the Turkish company Baykar received permits to produce Bayraktar TB2s in Ukraine and began constructing the plant. So they're already building a drone plant in Ukraine. I always think that's just insanely risky. So they must have to surely build these things underground. But yeah, that's really good news for the Ukrainians. It's all about that kind of long-term sustainable assistance, isn't it? So here we have 84,000 helmets being packed up by service members in the UK to be given to the Ukrainians, and that's really useful. We'll just listen to this chap. It's not long.
Sergeant Church from A Company 2 Royal Anglian. Over the past 2 weeks, soldiers from the 2nd Battalion Royal Anglian Regiment have been tasked with packing 84,000 helmets here at MOD Donington. The guys have done an absolutely fantastic job. We've been aiming off for about 12,000 helmets a day. We've surpassed that number. We were given 2 weeks to carry out this task, and the guys have now done it in 8 days, right, which is no small feat. Obviously, the guys have been packing the helmets, checking for serviceability, and making sure that they're good to send out to Ukraine, taking off all the British military markings and anything else that may be on the helmet.
So it all helps. I know, at the beginning of the war, Germany were slagged off for sending 5,000 helmets, but it's not like it's not sending helmets that's an issue. It's not sending the other stuff. So the UK, they still need helmets. They still need, body armor and all those kinds of things. Ukraine is. I find this this is a really important stat. Ukraine is currently firing up to 8,000 rounds of artillery a day, according to American officials. That's significant because at one point, I think they were firing maybe 3,000 rounds a day, 3,000 to 5,000. So if they have over doubled, this is huge because it means that although it's not up to where it needs to be, the ammunition provision to Ukraine, their own indigenous manufacture and the manufacture of allies has really ticked up to the point where it's affecting their performance on a battlefield, I'm sure. So the US is now working to ramp up supply of the shells with a target of producing up to 90,000 a month by financial year 2025, compared with 24,000 now. So that's insanely good in terms of increasing that provision. And I love this quote. I personally see, I mean, Jake Sullivan gets slagged off by people like Trent Alenko, but I love this. I personally sit in my office every morning and spend 30 minutes on 155mm ammunition. I bet when he went into government, right, at the beginning of the Biden administration, I bet he didn't think, right, I'm going to be spending 30 minutes a day like discussing and coordinating the manufacture and provision of 155mm ammunition shells. Like, but it's that important. It really is. It's like the counteroffensive is contingent upon artillery usage. Of course it is, to a really significant degree. Right, German Parliament member Roderich Kiesewetter calls calls for delivery of more Leopard 2 tanks, mine-clearing vehicles, air defence, ammunition, as well as the delivery of the German Taurus long-range cruise missile. So that is fantastic, as Tendar says. As usual, I can only say absolute Unterstützung. Full support. So yeah, that's great. I mean, obviously it's not being provided necessarily, that stuff or that extra stuff, but if there is pressure from within the German government, this is really good. And that also assumes that Taurus is not being provided at the moment. Right, and then talking about Russian provision, here are some T-80 BVMs and T-62s being seen on a train here. I risked that one. I thought this isn't going to have music. It's just a train. And do you know what? It had music. And it's just a train. Like, there's no point putting that music on there. Really? Is there? So, anyway, yeah, old tanks. But they are still tanks. They're still useful. They are obviously buffing these up from long-term storage somewhere. But, yeah, so that is what the Russians are providing. And this, to me, is actually pretty worrying. So this is an allegation that Kazakhstan haven't been getting on too well with Russia, so I don't know if this is a case of speaking out both sides of the mouth, is sending armour to Russia for use in the invasion of Ukraine. Transported by rail from western Kazakhstan south to the port of Aktau in the Caspian Sea and then by ships to Russia to reportedly reduce the possibility of satellite detection. Now, unverified, so I can't say whether this is correct or not, but Russia... Every time I talk to you about what the Allies are providing Ukraine, I always say, and then what are Russia getting? And it's usually nothing because they don't have the Allies to help them out. Well, actually, even if these are just pretty crappy, logistics vehicles and old fuel tanks and old vehicles like that and semi-commercial vehicles maybe even at times and whatnot, even if this isn't the greatest stuff, it is still enabling the Russians to do a job. I don't know, it seems like the Russians are just going to be absolutely... I mean, it's not a huge amount of stuff, this, is it, really, in the whole scheme of things, but it's still going to help. And even if it's, as I say, even if it's not great, that is useful. They are going to be absolutely just churning through so much equipment, it seems, the Russians. Right, anyway, geopolitical stuff, and there's actually quite a bit to talk about today. We're going to start with this. I love this. When asked if he would remove his pro-Ukrainian cover from his Facebook profile, so the kind of banner he's got or avatar, Bulgaria's defense minister, Tagarev, said yes, when Ukraine gets back all its territories. I love that. I love it. Good on you, Bulgaria. And particularly the Bulgarian defense minister. So there's this blockade. I've talked about the Black Sea blockade where the Russian ships are stopping merchant ships from moving. An unarmed Israeli merchant ship is the first to break the blockade imposed by Black Sea pirates of the Russian terrorist state. It sailed into the Danube today. The crew of its vessel showed more fortitude than all the political leadership of NATO states put together. Indeed, 6 ships have apparently broken the blockade. They've flouted Russia's threats, and an Israeli one was a first. So that is really good news. Let's hope more are to follow. And we've also seen some of the Russian patrol ships in the area be harassed by maritime drones from the Ukrainians. In Turkey, staying on a sea theme, a beach in the Black Sea resort of Şile near Istanbul was closed. About 30 unexploded mines were found. Wow. I don't know whether they are Ukrainian placed mines or Russian placed mines. Either way, I mean, it's not great, is it? And that's going to be an issue in the Black Sea for some time to come, for sure. Now, talking about Russian economics, the ruble is tanking. It continues its painful decline. It's lost nearly 50% of its value over the course of the last year. In real terms, the average Russian soldier, who was before making $700 a month, is making $350, while domestic costs continue to grow in Russia. Look at the past month, see how the exchange rate has not changed much. Russian authorities are desperate to maintain the ruble below 100 to the US dollar, a very expensive strategy. However, current projections are that it will reach $1 to 130 to 160 rubles by the year's end. Russia cannot avoid the Reaper forever. So this is a really worrying trend for Russia, and it kind of underwrites the idea that despite what Russia may be saying in public, that actually their economy is in a really fragile state, and it is very close to being in a lot of trouble. However, we are going to talk a little bit about some of the things they're doing internationally to try and mitigate that. But before we get there, let's talk about UK imposing sanctions on Russian judges for sentencing of a Putin opponent. So this is this chap, Vladimir Kara-Murza. So the UK government has imposed sanctions on those individuals in the deplorable sentencing of the dual national dissident Vladimir Kara-Murza after a Russian court dismissed his appeal against a 25-year sentence. I think dissident's possibly a little unfair. It's just opposition, politician, political activists. You know, they are either killed or they're put in prison, or they're put in prison and poisoned as well. Navalny and the Georgian leader, former Georgian leader. So just, terrible. Any time any Russian voice comes up to you, I get my rant voice on now, and says something to do with Ukraine not being about freedom and Ukraine not being like democratic or being corrupt, goodness me, you can just rip the Russian voice a new one there, because quite frankly, they have no leg to stand on. When you are literally murdering any person that doesn't fit with your narrative, when you're throwing them out of windows, when you're poisoning them, when you're locking them up in prison and then extending their stay in prison year on year by making up fake accusations, or not fake accusations, but fake crimes, as with Navalny, looking like he's going to be behind bars for sort of 30 years plus, as they keep extending it with like, oh, here's another 9 years for extremism or whatever. You're like, hang on, he's in prison. Like, how can he be committing those crimes? It's these guys are not interested in democracy. They're not interested in transparency. They're not interested in liberty, right? So just do one. 6 figures, 3 judges, 2 prosecutors, and an expert witness will face sanctions for their role in the politically motivated conviction. Kara-Murza, who holds Russian and British citizenship, lost an appeal against his 25-year jail sentence. So it was a really extreme jail sentence he was given. On Monday, the RAA Novosti state news agency reported the 41-year-old was jailed in April for treason and other offences. As Rishi Sunak says, this is desperate and unfounded. Rejecting his appeal is unjustifiable. He should be released immediately. The UK stands with him and his family. Yeah, absolutely. Just as long as that translates to supporting Ukraine with everything. Russia spreads propaganda in video games and platforms popular among gamers, according to the New York Times. Publication says the researchers have identified more than a dozen examples of the promotion of Russian messages in the games Minecraft, Roblox, World of Tanks. World of Tanks is owned by Wargaming.net, which I think is a Russian company. World of Warships, same, a lot of these games. Flycore, Armored Warfare, and War Thunder. So in Minecraft, the battle for Solidar, captured by the Russian army, was reproduced. In World of Tanks, a victory parade in 1945 was recreated, and in Roblox, forces in the guise of Lego men, sort of Roblox men, in the form of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, marched on the day of Russia, the newspaper notes. So lots of insidious ways that Russian propaganda is spread. UK ambassador to the UN, I like this, has stated that any attack by the Wagner group on NATO will be treated as an attack by the Russian Federation on NATO. So this is really important to connect Wagner, and we're going to go on to this in a second, to connect Wagner to Russia really formally and say they are just an extension of Russia. And if we are going to see Wagner doing some attack on a NATO force or country, or cause problems for a NATO country around the world, then that is triggering Article 5. This is absolutely the correct response, and that line needs to be spelled out explicitly for Moscow, says Patrick Fox here. Right, and this kind of comes on to where I've been kind of leading. Russia is not destabilizing the African continent at all, says No Report sarcastically. Breaking, Mali and Burkina Faso says that they will go to war alongside the coup leaders in Niger in the event of an ECOWAS invasion. So if the African nations come and support Niger, then actually Burkina Faso and Mali will come to the support of the coup. Now, what you need to know is Burkina Faso and Mali have kicked out the French recently and taken on Russian influence. So this is all about Russian influence in sub-Saharan Africa, in the African continent. This is hugely important geopolitically and in terms of energy. So I'm going to dwell on this for a little bit because it's that bloody important. Right. Military regime in Niger has, with immediate effect, banned the export of uranium to France. Over 50% of the uranium ore extracted from Niger, I've heard it's 100%, is used for fueling French nuclear power plants. 24% of EU uranium imports come from Niger, right? Although the argument is actually Niger needs France more than France needs Niger. But nonetheless, so here we have, this is the Telegraph, just dipping Daily Telegraph, saying both the US and France have sent troops and hundreds of millions of dollars of military and humanitarian aid in recent years to Niger, which was a French colony until 1960. The country was seen as the last working with the West against extremism in a francophone region where anti-French sentiment had opened the way for the Russian private military group Wagner. So there's this, Wagner has either prompted or exacerbated anti-French anti-colonial feelings in some of these nations, and Niger is the last one that is kind of pro-West and is helping to fight against Islamic extremism, amongst other things, in that area of Africa. After neighbouring Mali and Burkina Faso ousted the French military and began working with Wagner mercenaries, Antony Blinken visited Niger in March to strengthen ties and announce $150 million in direct assistance, calling the country a model of democracy. And of course, now you've seen a coup. Point being that the coup in Niger has its Russian fingerprints all over it, and they're expanding their influence over that entire region, and it's a zero-sum game. So as they expand their influence, the influence of the West, of the US, of France, is draining, and that is really important. It has loads of ramifications for the energy market. And I've done another 20 minutes of this already. I've recorded it already, but I'm cutting it to do it as a separate video because you don't want this to be another 20 minutes longer. But it is so important in the effect on European energy, on global influence of Russia. It is much more important than you might think. So please watch that Niger video, which will come out straight after this one. Anyway, take care. Thank you for your support. Please like, subscribe and share, and I'll speak to you soon.